We are Rogue Media Sports.
Oh, the final Doomsday podcast of the season. And
Presuming there's not a coaching change,
there may be
big news.
Yeah, and even if he stays, it's kind of news as well. But Cowboys have lost 23-19 and lose to the Commanders. And it was not the full Commanders, and it wasn't really the full Cowboys. Trey Lance was out there today, and Marcus Mariota, two high draft picks, squaring off in that second half.
Right.
And the Cowboys lose top 3 draft picks, I might add, both of them. And the Cowboys lose on the final play of the game. Ed Werder and I are high above AT&T Stadium. If you see a glare kind of right over my head.
The stadium, we're above the field.
I mean, okay, if you want to be exacting. I
don't want people to think we're sitting up on top of the
Yeah, I think they were very confused about that. But there, you see Jerry's glare kind of coming in above my head. We've really tried to.
He addressed that today after the game. It's not changing.
That's not going to change. I wondered if the glare is what Zacchaeus could
to miss on that trick play. And
on the trick play.
Yeah.
I thought Cliff was showing off for Jerry there with the trick play.
Cliff Kingsbury, the offensive coordinator.
Cliff Kingsbury,
for Dan Quinn.
Yeah, I thought he was being a little bit of a show off.
How about Dan Quinn, who was remarkably successful as a defensive coordinator for 3 years on Mike McCarthy's staff here in Dallas before he goes and takes a head coaching job in Washington. You know, it was Washington that mathematically eliminated the Cowboys from playoff contention a few weeks ago.
Being the Eagles.
And today it's Washington that administers to Mike McCarthy his 10th loss of this season, matching his career high. The Cowboys finishing the season at 7-10 and with a 2-7 record at home. That's tied for the second most home losses in a season. The only one worse, 1989, Jerry and Jimmy's first year, 1-15. And then overall, the Cowboys finished with a minus 122 point margin at home after having the best point margin in the NFL last season here at AT&T Stadium of 172, plus 172. That is the second worst home point margin in a season in franchise history, exceeded only by the team's inaugural 1960 season when they were minus 125, Tom Landry's winless 0-11-1 Cowboys team. So that's the kind of history they've either made or approached at the end of this 7-10 season.
Dubious numbers that Ed points out. We'll have a lot more for you. Ed, my day started as it normally does with me leaving too late to get to the game. And I was amazed from my house in Lake Highlands, which is sort of part of Dallas. It's on a little pocket of Dallas. Left about 10 a.m. thinking, boy, I could possibly get in some traffic. And after I took Techspress, as I love to do, and then rolled through the Techspress and took that Baird Farm exit, which is a beautiful exit. And I was in my parking spot almost too early. Like I was in my parking spot by 10:30 at the latest. It was like, it was amazing how quickly I got out here. And what that told me, and I think what you were kind of commented, you probably started a little bit earlier than I did, but maybe similar. It told us that there weren't going to be that many fans here today. So if Jerry was paying any attention, and I kind of meant to ask him, but there's some other people kind of dominating some of the discussion. I wanted to say, did you notice there were a lot of empty seats in the stadium today?
What message was being, did you detract from that?
Yeah.
What message did that send to you? Extract.
And there were plenty of Commanders fans, by the way. Which, by the way, I think a lot of them still have the old logos. They haven't made the switch. A lot of the fans around here, at least. And so they kind of took over the stadium to a certain extent. So there was some embarrassment in that, but Cowboys find a way to lose, and now we wonder if they're going to lose their head coach. And what's funny is, I have to give Ed some credit on this. Ed was the first person in the media, and it happened on Doomsday podcast, sort of saying to what a lot of people, even some of our listeners, thought was preposterous, that Mike may have some suitors out there, that McCarthy could have people interested in him. And I think because we're so close to this situation, it's like, that doesn't seem possible to a lot of our listeners and viewers. and yet it's sort of happening, and you're sort of hearing stories of Mike being, now could that be his agents? That's what they're paid to do, but he is being mentioned in association with other teams, and so so anyway, I wanted to kind of give you some props
Well, thank you
for bringing that to the table.
And there was a coach fired immediately
Already.
after their team played today.
Yeah.
It was not Mike McCarthy, and I have my doubts about whether there's going to be a coaching change here, which we'll I'm sure discuss in great length and detail.
Yeah.
Our conversations with Jerry Jones, maybe we'll even play part of that.
Uh-huh.
And then I kind of waited around because I know how McCarthy leaves the stadium, and I waited around to spend a few minutes with him by myself, and maybe you can share some insights from that conversation as well.
I would love that.
Maybe I'll save it till 6:30 in the morning on WFAA. I'll think about it.
I would really like to have that, and I think Iztuk would agree with me. He wants this on Doomsday. Your cohort there.
But Jared Mayo was the coach fired that we're referring to. New England, which won a game and played its way out of the number 1 draft pick, fires Jared Mayo, former player, Bill Belichick assistant, kind of a preordained succession type of setup. And then he lasts one miserable season. He lost 13 games this year, but gets fired after one of the wins.
Gets fired after one of the wins, and now they'll probably go hire another Patriot.
Mike Vrabel, I assume. I assume this is all being done quickly because Mike Vrabel is by far and away the number 1 available, head coach in the NFL with previous experience. And I thought if Jerry decided to make a change, that there would be some consideration to bringing him here. He's worked on the competition committee with Stephen Jones, so there is some history, some knowledge, familiarity that's so important to Jerry and Stephen. And he's known for having, physical teams that are about running the football and playing defense, and they overachieve. And those are none of the things the Cowboys have become known for. And that might have been appealing to Jerry, but it looks like he's going to New England. And I'm not sure, like I said, that Jerry's going to be soliciting any coaching interviews.
Yeah. And with that said, Mike Hamilton of Rogue Media Network, please play the music. All right. Thank you, Ronnie Foss, for providing us with such a great theme song and an intro into the Doomsday podcast. Ed, as we speak, scrolling through all his numbers that put this in perspective as the Cowboys lose this game, final play of the game, and the Redskins celebrate.
Redskins?
Ooh. Yeah, I mentioned them earlier because of the logo. The Commanders.
You made me mention it earlier.
Yeah, I did. I got you into it. I don't know. It's the whole rivalry thing. The Commanders, and there is some talk. I think Trump's trying to bring the old name back. The Commanders get the victory, 23-19, and this thing ends on a dime. And then, of course, Ed and I have just come from being with Jerry
downstairs, outside the locker room,
and we're going to let you hear a little bit of Jerry. But my takeaway, Ed, I want to hear yours, was just that Jerry was basically kind of like, and I thought this was interesting because you remember Jerry saying that, hey, we were pretty bad with Dak. Jerry was kind of honest about that earlier in the season.
Games with Dak.
Today it was like, what's your biggest thing to give fans hope? He's like, our quarterback room, getting our quarterback back. Like that was gonna be
quarterbacks in football, and he's going to be a well-protected quarterback with the investment they made on the offensive line.
Yes. So that was one of the things that came up, and so really my takeaway was that unless Mike McCarthy wants to be somewhere else, because he did make the point that, hey, if the coach doesn't want to be here, I don't want him here. He did say he wouldn't stand in the way of him talking to other teams, but it sounds like to me, Ed, if Mike did want to talk to another team, Jerry would kind of like let him with the idea of maybe he wants to be somewhere else.
Right.
Jerry,
if you want to go talk to somebody else, you must not want to be here.
Correct.
And so if you want to go solicit that other offer, why don't you just go on and see what interest there is? And I hope you get that job because you're not going to have one here when you come back.
That's kind of what he was indicating. But that said, I thought it was interesting that he said nothing would be judged on the basis of this season.
Right. Which is significant because
yes,
the last 3 seasons, Mike McCarthy went 12-5 with no real playoff success, 1-3 in the playoffs, and the only win was against a 8-9 Tampa Bay team with a 46-year-old quarterback, Tom Brady.
Yeah.
And they won that game decisively, but they lost twice at home.
Yeah, only the greatest quarterback of all time.
Right. They lost twice at home and never led in either one of those games. So they have been epic failures in the postseason, but they've had 3 straight years of great success during the regular season under McCarthy. And I think McCarthy would argue the only 2 years that I had a losing record, and both of those records included having 10 losses, were the 2 years that I didn't have Dak Prescott for the majority of the season. That's what I think he would say. But for Jerry to come out of there and say, and I quote, "Mike's one of the best coaches I think there is. He was made the coach here because I thought that, and he's done absolutely nothing to diminish my opinion of him as a coach." And then I said to him when I was able to make eye contact and make him aware that I had a question, and I said to him, "Well, given the praise, why would you be considering a coaching change?" And he said, I'm not saying that I am considering a coaching change." So I think that's pretty telling.
Mm-hmm.
Those 2 remarks right there, to me, are what set the tone for, hey, my sense is these 2 guys are going to get together this week and try and work out the terms of an extension. Now, what Jerry has in mind and what Mike has in mind, I don't know. And, I've been here covering this team since Jerry and Jimmy came into the league together, and Jerry dissolved his partnership with Jimmy after winning 2 straight Super Bowls and hired then Barry Switzer. So I would tell you there's no predicting this man, especially not on the subject of coaches.
And you and I both found it humorous, and I knew when he said it, you were going to be the one to throw it out there. At some point, when you and I kind of started getting into it with, and you were asking some questions, and I jumped in and basically was like, do you have a list?
Yeah.
Are you ready?
Which I thought might anger him, quite honestly. But
yeah,
good question.
Yeah, and he said he started talking about.
Well, he said he always has an awareness of
he's
coaches.
always ready,
right?
And I've heard something to that. I think he said that in the past to a certain extent. But then he started talking about. He said there'll be like, I think he used the number 500.
That's why
there'll be 500 coaches at the Senior Bowl.
And I said, Jerry, that number 500 has gotten you in trouble before.
Yes,
as applied to coaches, because obviously in 1994 at the owners' meetings, the beginning of the end of his partnership with Jimmy Johnson came because Jerry made the infamous remark that 500 coaches could win championships with the Cowboys, given the roster that he provided Jimmy Johnson.
I don't think with this roster they can do it.
He didn't say it with this one.
Yeah. So anyway, that was Jerry, and he had a lot of different directions to go. I also thought it was interesting that he said he I don't know if he was just being funny or what, but he acted like he didn't even know like when Mike became a free agent.
Yeah. Which I was just looking to get the dates exactly right.
January 14th?
Technically, his contract ends on the 9th of January, which is Wednesday.
Yeah.
And the Cowboys have exclusive rights to negotiate with him through January 14th. Now, during that time, in the intervening period, other teams could request from the Cowboys permission to interview McCarthy. And so if that happens and Jerry says yes or Jerry says no, we'll have a sense of just how much value he has on McCarthy and whether he is in the process of, trying to exclusively negotiate a deal without Mike going to solicit offers anywhere else.
He also said that he did not know about this Cooper Rush incentive.
$250,000 incentive.
And $250,000 of additional money that would come in if he played, 65?
No, 55%.
55%
and he's at
of the snaps.
53.2.
Okay.
So that he crossed the 45% threshold. So he got half the $500,000 bonus.
Yeah.
Today was about trying to get the other half. And of course, Trey Lance, who has never started a game in the 2 seasons he's been here, is all of a sudden starting this game and playing the entirety of it. And so I think the question people have is, did Jerry intervene here, the front office intervene with a coaching decision and have Cooper Rush benched so that the front office could save $250,000?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was never really accounted for. And Jerry certainly didn't say what many have suggested. Oh, Jerry will just give him the money. Well, Jerry's going to say, as a businessman, the threshold was, we agreed it was 55%. Did he play 55%? If he did, I'll pay him. If he didn't, I'm not paying him.
Yeah, that was it. And Jerry said that he only knew about that because he read about it today, I think, about the Cooper Rush incentive.
That's just something the agents put in there, he said.
Okay, and we'll hear from Jerry in a second. But Ed, can you shed light on your encounter with Mike McCarthy, not just when you were with him in the post game with all the other reporters, but I believe you were able to kind of stay around and you were organizing some thoughts, as you tend to do for this podcast and some of your other work for WFAA. What was you got to visit with Mike McCarthy a little bit, maybe as he was exiting the premises this evening?
Yeah, and I would just say that the sense I got from him and his point of view about this was pretty consistent with what the tone Jerry established. And between the two of them, I really get a very strong sense that they're going to get together this week. And normally, I think the Cowboys and McCarthy in his 5 years here has had a pretty extended period of time where he and the coaches meet with the players and exit interviews. I think that's going to be truncated this year in an effort to get to resolving the Cowboys coaching situation and Mike McCarthy's future and the future, of his coaching staff. All of them are out of contract. Mike Zimmer's out of contract. Brian Schottenheimer's out of contract. John Fossil's out of contract. And McCarthy has spoken about his concern being less about himself and more about those people because they haven't been making $5-6 million a year for 18 years like McCarthy has. They're not as established in the game as he is, and while he's saying that, he's also creating the impression that, hey, I'm confident in what I've done here and in Green Bay, and I'm confident I can work somewhere else if that becomes necessary. To your point about maybe he'll have other options, and he does. If the contract expires, there might be other teams that have interest in Mike McCarthy, and I think the first one that comes to mind is New Orleans, because he worked with Mickey Loomis, the general manager there. Mickey Loomis' son works in Cowboys scouting department right now, and Mike's first time as an offensive play caller was with the Saints, and they had quite a bit of success. And so that creates a familiarity, and obviously they need an offensive coach. They've had a defensive coach in Dennis Allen in recent years. They've underachieved offensively. I don't know if they're going to keep Derek Carr, but they need somebody who's a good quarterbacks coach and a good offensive play caller who can create a culture. I think those are what Mike perceives to be his strengths. So I think they're going to try and get through that process more quickly so they can get to, all right, under what circumstances am I coming back? But I got the very clear impression that is Mike's preference. I think Mike's preference is to stay here as long as he can create the circumstances that he wants. I got the sense that he has a good relationship with Jerry. He doesn't love all the drama that's constantly created around this team. I don't know how much of that he blames Jerry for. And I don't know that there's any way to diminish that or much less make it go completely away. But those were my primary takeaways in my conversation with him. And so I think while originally I believe maybe it would take until the end of the week for this to gather some momentum and reach a conclusion one way or the other, I now think it could come by the middle of the week. I think it's possible. Unless Jerry decides we're out of the playoffs. I love people to talk about us while the playoffs are going on. Let's make an announcement, or let's keep it all quiet until Saturday and Sunday next week when these other teams start playoff games.
Yeah, and I saw you bring that up on Twitter. Jerry's not opposed to kind of taking over the play, even like Super Bowl week. He's been known when the Cowboys are not in it, which has been the last 29 years, 30 years that the Cowboys have not been in it. He likes taking over some of the storylines. I go back to one moment, Jerry, when I asked him about those, you have a list of other coaches, do you have something ready if this thing doesn't work out with Mike? He did say something to the effect of there are Super Bowl winning coaches out there. I think he said something like that. And so I started thinking, okay, who could he be talking about?
Pete Carroll?
Who's out there? One's Pete Carroll, one's John Gruden. So, I mean, so those would be a couple of names. I do kind of sense that Gruden's trying to get back in. I don't know if it'll happen. I think Carroll would like to coach again. How old's Pete Carroll? 73?
Yeah, he left as the oldest coach in football. He and Belichick were the two oldest coaches in football. He did not want to leave. He ultimately, was thinking it over at the end of last season in Seattle, and ultimately he decided he wanted to come back and coach, and they didn't give him that opportunity. So he definitely wants to coach again. Whether he'd be a consideration here, I'm not sure. Gruden would certainly be somebody that Jerry could sell to the fan base, but like you said, he feels he already has that in Dak Prescott, which Jerry might be misjudging the public's appraisal of Dak Prescott and appreciation for what he brings, even though we've seen what a disaster it is twice when he's absent. I'm not sure everybody's on board with Dak Prescott being an elite quarterback.
Yeah.
And the other things Jerry said today that were interesting were, without equivocation, he said he is not going to walk away from his role as a general manager of this team.
Yeah.
He said he didn't buy basically he described it as, I bought the Cowboys for the opportunity to be the general manager.
Yeah.
Now, I bought it for
as an occupation,
me, not for my kids.
I wanted this to be an occupation. Yeah. He said it wasn't for my kids.
Right. So forget that. Anybody who's thinking that Jerry Jones is going to come to his senses and decide that he's not good at this. And he was asked, well, how do you justify that? He's like, well, we have the 5th or 6th best record in all of football to justify it. So in his mind, there's no need to justify it further. There's no consideration in his mind that anybody could possibly do it better.
Yeah. Fans love that. When an owner comes out and says, we've been a top 6 regular season team over the past 15 years. And maybe, Ed, if you and I go back and look, maybe there's some accuracy to that, but nobody cares because it's all about the playoffs, and they've had no playoff success. And I have people say to me, and you see this on Twitter too, one of those guys on Twitter, he puts up some interesting things sometimes, so I'll mention him, but that Marcus Mosher, and he'll say things like, why does San Francisco not get the same heat that Jerry and the Cowboys do for underperforming this season or not making the playoffs?
Because I've been to the NFC Championship game 3 times and the Super Bowl twice. Maybe that.
Like 8 times.
But I mean, under the current coach.
Yes, but I'm saying since the Cowboys have even been to a conference title game, they've been to like 8 or 9 conference title games. So it's pretty easy to see why the 49ers aren't treated this year exactly like the Cowboys, because they've had way more success over the years than the Cowboys. Unless you're just a zero sum, it's only about winning the Super Bowl. I mean, again, Ed, we said this before. What would this town do if the Cowboys made an NFC title game? It'd be the end of all. I mean, this whole thought that we only care about Super Bowls, nobody cares about anything else. That's not true anymore.
Right. Getting to 30 years ago it was.
Getting to a title game would be enormous.
Huge accomplishment.
Yes. Like when Detroit made it or when Cincinnati made it in recent years. I mean, it ended these huge droughts. And
futility,
yeah. And so in some ways the Cowboys have had, even now they have longer futility than those others. And the team they played today are the only one that's with them really in the terms of like the length of futility. The Commanders haven't been to a title game in forever. Maybe longer than the Cowboys, right? Yeah, you got to go back.
There are very few teams.
Like 40 years almost, yeah.
I could look it up, but it might take me a minute.
It's okay. No, you have something down there. You have a Google machine. I want to do this before we get to stretch. Let's do this. Jerry, at the first of his time today, he talked to us for about 23 to 26 minutes, somewhere in there. But he did start out in those first few minutes only talking about Mike McCarthy, and everybody was asking about him. Let's give you a sample of what Jerry Jones had to say about Mike McCarthy and his future with the Dallas Cowboys.
Well, he's with the team. That can happen here in the dressing room after the game, or it can be tomorrow. And so I made it tonight and visit about going forward, visit about looking forward, sharing disappointment, but sharing the fact that in a big way, they'll never forget the guys that they're lined up with in that room, the down times and the good times. And that needs to be brought up right now because we're not happy with the outcome of this ball game. I thought we really played with a lot of the kind of energy that you play if you were going to the playoffs. So this game really, energy-wise, tribute-wise, coached-wise, played-wise, was a real tribute to our team and gives me a lot of encouragement going forward.
Jerry, what was your message to Mike McCarthy, and what does he mean to you?
Well, I spoke to the whole team, and Mike was in the room with all the coaches and the whole team. And, of course, Mike's one of the best coaches that I think there is. He was made the coach here because I thought that, and he's done absolutely nothing to diminish my opinion of him as a coach. And I am really impressed with the way the players identify, look, are with him. They're inside with him, and that's important. That's important because he's had some times when each one of those players individually, as well as a team, have not been fun times. And so he's been there in his way for them on an individual basis. He's been there in his way for them on a team basis. And at the end of the day, you know that these are people. All I've got to do is see Bill Bates out here today, and years flash through my mind about days with Bill, a glass of tea or anything like that. There's lots of things that go into being together on trying to win games and win a championship.
As coaches and their families try to make plans for the future, when do you anticipate making some decision about those futures?
I'll follow this kind of the time frame that I've done in the past. And that'll be it. So the way that that it's evolved in the past will be a time frame, and I can tell you the past is not necessarily consistent in terms of the time frame.
When you said Friday that the hay is in the barn about McCarthy and the coaches, does that mean, have you made up your mind on Mike McCarthy?
No. Well, the point is that all that I'm going to look at, I was answering the question, and that was, does the outcome of this game really impact his future? And I said no. All of the things I'll consider are hays in the barn.
Report came out that you want McCarthy back, but maybe others in the building don't. Is there any truth to that?
Well, I again, at the risk of talking about something that I don't want to talk about at this time, and we've got a lot of work to do, but certainly we're all looking for ways to get better.
That's good.
There he is. Jerry Jones.
The greatest general manager in football.
That's right. The big time GM that he is. And we'll continue to react to that.
We should say that Jerry, the next segue coming out of that is Jerry did go in and he said he spoke to the entire team and all of the coaching staff in the locker room after the game about this journey that they've taken together and so forth. And it was also interesting to watch as the season ended, Mike McCarthy meeting all the players and coaches as they came off the field and down the tunnel into the locker room, embracing everybody. And there's a real sense of finality, I think, in all of that. That we witnessed today. Yeah,
and I think his message was something along the deals like you only get that this team, and you played for each other, and I think Jerry was a little emotional about all of that, and then of course we got into a long discussion about everything else under the sun, including Ed. Real quick before we get to stretch, Trey Lance, who has been a 4th round pick starts the game today. Made some good plays. I mean, at times, it's exciting to watch a guy who's that fast and can make those plays with his legs, and threw for somewhere in the neighborhood of about 240 yards.
244. 20 of 24 for 244 yards. Unfortunately,
20 of 34.
Oh, this says 20 of 24.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was going to say, well, then all of his incompletions came in the red zone, because I can remember
a lot of those
3 or 4 misses in the red zone that were bad misses, potential touchdown plays. Narrow misses to Ferguson and Brandon Cooks in the second half, but a bad miss to Rico Dowdle after he made a great play to avoid a sack.
Yeah.
And then running to his left, he bounced it to Rico Dowdle for what should have been a touchdown. But the Cowboys have been terrible in the red zone all year, and they continued in that trend today under Trey Lance. But, you can argue that Trey Lance didn't earn it, but I would say that the guy's been on the roster for 34, 35 regular season and playoff games and never really played a substantial amount, never started, had thrown 7 passes. When you give up a 4th-round pick, it's not a bad idea to get that guy on the field at least once before you let him out of the organization.
Yeah.
You paid him $6 million, giving up a 4th-round draft pick for him. He was pretty good throwing to the other 4th-round draft pick.
Tolbert?
No, Mingo. Jonathan Mingo had a big play to Mingo. 2 4th-round picks that Jerry surrendered for those players.
Jonathan Mingo, the great Mingo, was getting downfield. Tolbert was getting downfield. The man was running. And, I mean, you could make the argument that he outplayed Daniels in that first half. Washington didn't get much done. They dropped a touchdown, and then at the very end, they who was that? McLaurin
caught a touchdown pass.
Yeah,
over Deron Bland.
And it was Mariota. If you wonder where Mariota was, sometimes with some of these quarterbacks, you're like, oh, he plays for them. And there he was in the second half, and he can run, by the way. And he showed it to the Cowboys, and on a key 4th and short, they faked the handoff, and Micah made a great play on the running back. The running back didn't have the ball, and Mariota took off on the run.
And if that had been Daniels would have scored with his speed.
Oh, Mariota's still pretty fast,
Cowboys,
actually.
That was one of the shortcomings of the Cowboys' defense this year, was they came into the game allowing the 3rd most yards to opposing quarterbacks. So that deficiency was reflected yet again today. And so the Cowboys have a lot of decisions to make this offseason with like 22 players whose contracts are up, resolving the coaching situation with Mike McCarthy. Is Mike Zimmer, willing to come back as a defensive coordinator? He was non-committal about that when I've asked him the last 2 weeks. So a lot has to be resolved before they prepare for the draft and free agency, and whether they're more active in free agency or not remains to be determined. But they were certainly hurt by the roster and all the injuries and all the holes that the roster had in it, the lack of depth. I mean, let's be honest. Nobody on defense is going to win playing, starting 5 and 6 different edge players and spending 12 games without DeMarcus Lawrence and 4 games without Micah Parsons, and starting 8 different cornerbacks, and Deron Bland misses 10 games and Trayvon Diggs misses 6 or 7 games. I mean, that was an impossible situation.
Yeah. I mean, some would say, the Lions continue to lose a lot of players, and they continue to win, but they haven't lost their starting quarterback. Right. So I get that.
And I think if you look at all the teams in the playoffs, if I'm not mistaken, every one of them has their starting quarterback. That's the difference that position makes. Yeah. Every team going into the postseason has its starting quarterback healthy.
The Steelers today would have not liked to have their starting quarterback. They would have rather had the backup in there, I think.
They'd rather have the quarterback they started the season with.
Exactly.
Maybe the one they started last season with. Yeah. Kenny Pickett.
Pickett. We saw Pickett recently, didn't we, with the Eagles?
With the Eagles last week.
And then whoever relieved him was great.
He was good.
He threw for 2 touchdowns. All right, let's hear from our resident coach, former Cowboys scout and coach, one of the harshest graders ever today, but we'll get his thoughts on.
We'd still be in elementary school if he was grading for us.
Yeah. That's accurate. Yeah, and I had some tough. Mrs. Busby in first grade was tough on me. But let's listen to let's visit with Glenn Stretch Smith. All right, it is time for Stretch Plays with Glenn Stretch Smith, former Cowboys scout and coach. And Stretch, Cowboys lose on the final play of the game, 23-19. It was kind of, nobody really wanted to see overtime in that game, I don't think. So whatever. They finished 7-10, lose the game. And I just kind of wanted you off the top. I mean, you saw Micah Parsons get off to a hot start. I mean, he had 2.5 sacks before you could even, it was just within the first series or 2, he was on fire at the start of this game. Cowboys did some good things, obviously, on defense, and then Mariota stung them at the end of the game. Can you give us your thoughts on, Trey Lance finally gets an opportunity in a regular season game to play a whole football game? Because he had some moments, obviously, at the end of the half, missing that throw after escaping. That was a tough moment for him. What did you think of his just overall day? Did he look like a serviceable NFL quarterback to you?
First of all, my opinion is that they gave him the week to practice, put in a game plan for him with some of that zone read stuff, some of the opportunities that he had to boot out of there. And so with that being said, I think he was able to practice all week. I think you got to see some things that he can do good, which is push the ball into the middle of the field. I mean, you can tell he likes the dig throws. He likes the deep overs. He's comfortable with that throw. And then you see early in the game, they get in the red zone, or not early in the game, but just before the half. They get it 1st and 10 on the 10, and he's got a corner route that's there, I believe, to Cooks, and he throws it and leads him out of bounds. Then he comes back on 3rd down and short arms the throw after he makes the escape. I'm saying that to say the only way that he had any chance and you had any chance to get a true evaluation of him is to let him play in a real full-speed game. We could go out there in 7-on-7. We could go out there in joint practices and training camp. We could go out in the preseason. But ultimately, you got to see a full-speed Washington defense who was coming after him, and you got to see what he could do, which is he is functional in some situations. And can he get better if given the playing time to make the adjustments to drive that ball into the corner with not so much air, to go ahead and let that ball go to the boundary to Dowdle when he was able to escape. I think you're able to see those kind of things, and you were able to at least be able to give him a fair evaluation. I know you've heard me say this before, but I really learned this early when I got into the NFL, and that was from Mike Giddings. And that's when you're evaluating guys, you can ultimately put a grade on them, but then you gotta say if the guy's currently in the NFL, is he an ascending player with the arrow going up, or is he a descending player with the arrow going down? I don't think you ever stay the same, and I believe that. So if you're honest and you look at a one-game sample set of what Trey Lance was able to do, at the end of the day, you have to give an ascending arrow whatever your grade is. And I thought he did some good things managing the game. I thought that he did some good things to be able to show you that he can escape, and knowing that he'll get better with his ability to keep his eyes down the field, set his feet once he escapes, and be able to make the throw. So if you're asking me to grade him, I think he is a serviceable NFL backup with a lot more upside than Cooper Rush has. Having said that, now he's I believe, an unrestricted free agent. So then the question becomes, how much money can you pay a guy like that? And you know, I just don't think that that's a fit with this football team right now, because he's probably going to demand a little money, and you're gonna want to pay a bottom end dollar to a backup.
Okay, now on another front, we just came back from visiting with Jerry. Jerry kind of acts like the ball's almost in Mike McCarthy's court at this point, that he's not going to judge him harshly on 7 and 10 with all the injuries that happened, and obviously with the quarterback being out. So it does sound like there's a pretty good shot that Mike's back. Can you walk us through? I mean, it's not certain. I mean, he didn't come out and go for sure that he's back, but he didn't say that he's not coming back. Can you kind of walk us through what Jerry will do in the next few days, and what does your gut tell you about where this thing's going? Because you usually have a general sense of what the Cowboys are going to do.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I believe that Jerry would like to have an opportunity for Mike to leave the building on his own. Ultimately, to say, hey, he got a better deal. Whatever team, let's just throw out there, whatever team has an opening, the Jets, that they gave him a better opportunity than what Jerry would have offered him. That's what I believe. I don't think Jerry likes – I know he doesn't. He does not like to fire people. Now, he would not have to fire Mike because he has an expiring contract. But I believe, in theory, he would like for Mike to go get another job. And then Jerry would like to take that opportunity to maybe interview a few guys, talk to a few guys that are out there. Saying that, I'm not sure that there's a better option right now as I look at this, and I think as Jerry looks at it, than Mike McCarthy. He's got a quarterback that's got 3 more years on a deal. He's got a receiver that he just signed to a big deal. He's got a defensive player that he needs to sign along with 21 other unrestricted free agents that they're going to have to maneuver around. And I believe he probably has a comfort level with Mike McCarthy, knowing that Mike McCarthy's offense is installed here, and Mike McCarthy has a pretty good feel of the pulse of the personnel that the Cowboys currently have. So I think Jerry's looking at it from 2 different angles to say, I really don't want to fire the guy, but at the same time, if he leaves the building, I'm going to be okay. But if he doesn't leave the building, then he's going to show a commitment to want to be with this organization. Mm-hmm. And if he shows that commitment to want to be with this organization, then I could see, Jerry giving him, some sort of a 3-year contract. The flip side of that to me, though, is it's almost like you missed out last year when you had the opportunity to move on from him when you were disappointed in a first-round loss to Green Bay. You let Dan Quinn get out of the building. So I think there's some ebbs and flows that Jerry's probably having to deal with and tug around with when he talks to Steven. And I don't know who else outside the building he might be listening to. But at the end of the day, he doesn't like to fire people, and he doesn't like to be put in that situation.
Stretch, I got to tell you, man, it's been a fun season. Love watching you on WFAA. People love you on Doomsday. Thank you for your insight. We really appreciate it.
Hey, it's been a heck of a time, and sorry it wasn't a better year, but Mosley's son will be up tomorrow, brother. We'll be kicking it around again, and hopefully get another opportunity to do this.
All right, there he goes, Glenn Stretch Smith with Stretch Plays. And there he was.
Not my WFAA brother.
That's right, man.
He gets the night shift. I get the morning shift. I'd like to change that going forward.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm sure he'll be pleased with that when he finds out.
He just did.
I would love to get involved with WFAA. I'm a Fox guy. I'm more of a Ducey guy. But Ed, final thoughts. And again, we'll get together if we need to and react to any news. On the coaching front, Ed will be plugged in. We'll be watching that closely. Jerry did say, he always has a list, and he'll be going to the Senior Bowl, and there'll be all kinds of coaches there he could choose from, but they'll have to move quickly if it happens. And what's your gut tell you after talking to Mike and us talking to Jerry for a while? What does your gut tell you? What happens in the next 2 or 3 days?
My sense of it is that Jerry and Mike will get together at some point this week, and as long as there's not an issue about Mike remaining the play caller or Jerry and Steven or the front office wanting to make some change to his coaching staff that he feels strongly about, then I think Mike will probably be back. The other question, I think, is how long is Jerry willing to commit for? We gave him a 5-year contract coming here. Is he going to give him a 4-year contract, or is he going to give him 5? Is he going to try for 3? I don't think people, realize when owners are making a coaching hire like this that it's a big financial decision. I mean, we're probably talking about, $40, $50 million between what the head coach is going to make and his assistants are going to make. It's a big commitment. And is Jerry willing to commit for what is typically the extension a coach of Mike's history would expect? Or is it going to be something shorter than that that's going to cause Mike to be alarmed and feel insecure again? Because I think that's the last thing he wants after the experience he's just had.
Yeah.
Almost never does a Super Bowl winning coach, no matter where they won it or how they won it, or whether they won it for this organization or a previous one, as he did, almost never is somebody forced to work the final year of their contract in this league, especially not coming off 3, 12, and 5 seasons. And so he's going to want to have a real sense of security. And is Jerry willing to provide that? Those are the only things I could see preventing this from happening.
Yeah, and Jerry, in talking about the future and coaching and everything, he did bring up how he likes incentive-based contracts. But he also, I'm sure Cooper Rush would find that interesting.
He should probably know about them before he talks about how great they are.
He just talked about it.
And oh, by the way, he doesn't have one of those.
No.
He's the only one in the organization, other than probably Steven, who isn't on an incentive plan. As he said, he bought the team for an occupation. And so he's going to be the general manager in perpetuity.
Yeah.
Well, that's different than what you're saying works for everybody else. How come what works for everybody else in your mind isn't applied to you?
No, never has.
And he'll say, well, I took the risk, and my incentive is, building this franchise up to, its true value. Maximizing the value of the franchise is and winning. That's my job.
Yeah. I think the most frustrating part to Cowboys fans as we in this was just that whole thing about, I like to point you to all these, we're the 6th best record over the past 15 seasons, because that signals he thinks he's done a pretty good job. He's haven't done as well as he'd like to, but he thinks he's been graded too harshly.
Right. For all the times he stops you and says, hey, I take some ownership of this. First person I look at is myself. I'm partly to blame for this, but does he really mean it when he then says things like that?
Yeah. And when he doesn't really hold himself to accountable, I mean, I think he's going to be fairly, in the end, with Mike McCarthy, as he said, he's not going to hold him accountable for this season 7-10 because of all the injuries, the quarterback being out, the edge players Ed mentioned, and so that's how this thing's going to end. Ed, man, good work as always. We appreciate. I want Blake Marable. Ed, I can't wait to show you this. We are in the process of filming something that will show you the interior and exterior of these gorgeous luxury homes. Blake Marable, marablehomes.com, and the Marable family. We can't thank them enough. And Ed, they're going to start building them right out there in your neighborhood. So I cannot wait for you to, I don't know if you want to do one in Colorado or Flower Mound, but I think you're going to love these. But thank you, Blake Marable. Thank you to Rogue Media Network and
Corey
Ed,
Dickman,
and of course
Media.
Mike Hamilton, who's been producing all of these things.
He must be tired of us.
No, I think Mike is really, I think it's we
you
forged a nice
credential.
friendship. Yeah. I just want people to know I qualified. I have been.
You worked hard for that.
I have
a lot of groveling for that.
People don't know what I have to go through to get credentialed out here. Okay, Ed, thank you.
It was fun. I enjoyed
Happy
it.
New
Thanks,
Year.
Mark.
It is the Doomsday Podcast. Good night from AT&T Stadium in Arlington, Texas. We'll see you next time.
We are Rogue Media Sports.